Dear Comicstorian, I'm a longtime Western comics and manga fan who has been using YouTube to talk about my love of comics for about 4 months. This week, I read 2 of your tweets, the first on how calling everyone a Nazi or a SJW in the comic book community scares people away, and your tweet on just not caring about the fight for comics culture. I've thought about what you and others have said on the subject for a day or two, and I believe I have something worthwhile to add to the discussion you are having. I haven't tried to read all the tweets you've exchanged with other comic YouTubers, in part because I hate trying to sort through all the junk on Twitter, and in part because I don't want to try and play the umpire. No one's asked me to be their mother and make them kiss and make up, and no one has voted to have me represent them personally, Comicsgate, or their side of the fight for comics culture. I'm speaking for myself because although I believe you have a solid point you've expressed in your tweets, I think you are incorrect about what the fight for comics culture is, who is fighting it, and why they're fighting. In short, I am with you 100% when you say you don't want people to be scared away from comic books, because I want comic books to be successful and enjoyed by all kinds of people. I want people of every race, religion, ethnicity, and political party to be able to enjoy comics. But if we don't know why people are fighting about comics culture, or if we are wrong about who they are and what they want, we're certainly not going to be able to resolve the fight. I'm not writing this to ask you to pick up a pitchfork, join a side, and start using any particular hashtag. I'd be happy if you just heard me out and give some thought to whether you think I've been fair to you and others. Before writing this, I did watch several videos by 4 YouTubers with larger audiences than mine, because I didn't want to repeat something that had been expressed better by someone else. If you haven't already, I'd highly encourage you to listen to Mim Headroom's video, because I think his focus on the health of the industry and helping more people enjoy their comics lines up with what you say you want, even if Mim is disagreeing with you. But I'm going to let other channels speak for themselves and not dig into their videos in detail. I've written this informally, as if we got the chance to sit and grab coffee together and talk comics, and one of us asked, "So, what do you think about all this drama on comics Twitter recently?" And we went from there. Let me read your first tweet from January 22nd. Do people not realize constantly spouting political views, calling everyone a Nazi, a SJW, in the comic book community scares people away? Amen. I don't want people scared away from comics. Amen. I don't want people to just see arguing. I want comics to be like what football and baseball used to be for Americans. Something that people with different political and religious views can come together and enjoy. But who exactly are you referring to? Is this only in reference to John Malin's January 21st tweet, which started so much Twitter drama? In one of your later replies, you mentioned Malin, so I'm sure that was on your mind, but you seem to be referring to more than just John Malin. This is about people in general who call other people Nazis or call other people SJWs. I think it's noteworthy that the largest of the channels connected with the Comicsgate hashtag, or the SJW Marvel tag on YouTube, has essentially agreed with your point in this tweet and tried to stop using the term SJW so much. But is this an accurate description of what the fight for comics culture is? Well, I think it's close. Yeah, when I hear people arguing and it descends into name-calling, I don't often hear insults like libtard or right-wing nut being the go-to insults. The go-to insults appear to be Nazi on one side and SJW on the other. If you were talking about people using libtard and wingnuts as insults, I think I'd be with you 100%, because that would be purely a petty political discussion that would scare people away from comics. Libtard being the mean name used by the right, and right wingnut being the mean name used by the left. They're roughly saying the same thing. You are stupid because of your political views. But I think it's noteworthy that it's not those terms that are being thrown around. It's Nazi and SJW. Why? Well, first, because I don't think this is purely a left versus right discussion. While talking to individuals both on Twitter and on YouTube, I've met supporters of Donald Trump and critics of Donald Trump, people on both sides of the abortion debate, both sides of the gun control debate, people of different religions, atheists, agnostics, yet all of them share a dislike of social justice warriorism in their comics. If you don't believe me, I could give you some names, I could show you some tweets, but the people using the Comicsgate hashtag and complaining about SJWs in comics are not all Trump voters or people of the same religion. Even though I've used the term Comicsgate before, I always use it somewhat sheepishly because it's the common term being used, but I don't exactly like it because it has very little overlap with Gamergate except for a few general topics. Gamergate's already a can of worms, and I get it if people don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, but Comicsgate is a much smaller group of people who tend to be older than most gamers, and the term seems somewhat forced to make an interesting hashtag. Comicsgate isn't a movement of people with one set of goals or beliefs. Frankly, I like the term comics culture war better as a way of describing this ongoing discussion. But if you like the term Comicsgate because it's easy to remember, I'm okay with that. So long as you remember it's just a hashtag. It's not some underground political party who have meetings to discuss our shared agenda. The advantage of that is there are a lot of perspectives, and the disadvantage is it can be hard to keep up with who's who and what the latest Twitter drama is, which is why I'm consciously trying to talk about the issues I think underlie the ongoing debate. I see a lot of diversity in this group because even if they sharply disagree on some very important issues, they strongly agree that they don't want to read comic books which promote social justice warriorism. Now the only question is, are we all wrong? Is this term, is it just an insult and nothing more? Well, as Douglas Ernst has documented, Marvel Comics writer Mark Waid has identified himself proudly as an SJW and said that every superhero you love is an SJW. If you read the tweets from the John Malin discussion, you surely saw a number of people arguing that the X-Men are all social justice warriors and have always been social justice warriors. No one on the left seriously identifies themselves as a libtard or argues that their heroes are all libtards. Yet, some do accept the label social justice warrior. Why? Because they believe in a philosophical idea called social justice. They believe it is good and true. And they also believe a warrior mentality in defense of social justice is good as well. I've interacted with people who support the social justice side on certain political or moral issues. But even they don't like the warrior part of social justice warrior because the word warrior is key to understanding the term's meaning. If you believe in social justice so much that you think it's good to go to war with others and destroy them using warlike tactics, you are a social justice warrior. It's not enough to be on the political left to be a social justice warrior. Therefore, the term SJW, even though it's often intended as an insult, it's not only an insult. It describes a group of people who exist, and at least some of them gladly accept the label as accurate. Does that mean I could still abuse the term and chase people away from comics by calling everyone and everything a SJW without listening to them? Absolutely, but it's not a meaningless concept. And this is the first big thing I think you missed in your first tweet when you lump people who call other people SJWs into the same category as people who call other people Nazis, as if they were two opposite sides of the exact same coin. But those terms are not the same thing. Calling someone a Nazi is very different from calling someone an SJW. SJW is a slang term many people use, but there's a good chance if someone says to your boss, "Hey, that guy who works for you is an SJW and should be fired," your boss may have no idea what they're talking about. But if someone says to your boss, "That guy who works for you is a Nazi and should be fired," your boss knows what the term Nazi means. I saw people in your comment section, some people roasting you as an SJW and others insinuating you're a Nazi sympathizer. Which term would you be more unhappy to see if people Googled your name? And the first result was, Comicstorian is a fill-in-the-blank. Google, Comicstorian is a SJW? Google, Comicstorian is a Nazi. I think Nazi is clearly the worst term being thrown around. I understand if you do not like terms like SJW and Nazi being thrown around willy-nilly by people, but they are not the same terms, and we can't achieve the goal you say you want to achieve unless we recognize how the terms are different. So those are just the two terms being thrown around. But who's calling who a Nazi and who's calling who an SJW? Again, if this was just Republicans versus Democrats or conservatives versus liberals, I think you'd have a point, Comicstorian. But I don't see the two sides as mere images of one another. I think this is a fight the social justice warriors started by walking up to people who were reading comic books and loudly announcing, "Attention world, this person is a Nazi. This person is a sexist. This person is a racist. This person is a homophobe. And that comic book they're holding, it promotes racism. It reinforces patriarchy. It instills heteronormativity. And I want that comic book to change." I didn't run up to the SJW, insult them, and then demand changes in the SJW comic book they were reading so that all their comics teach conservative opinions only. Was this a small group of a few random individuals on the internet? Well, if it was only that, who cares? There's always going to be a few salty comments online. But it wasn't just a few randos. It was a large group of people, including comics professionals, using these kinds of insults and rhetoric on customers. Now, this gets to what I think is the key point of your second tweet. Should we care about the comics culture war? Does it matter? Should we invest much time or energy even thinking about it? Well, again, I think it depends on what we're talking about. I've seen some channels which will talk about culture as their main focus and embrace the idea of talking about culture as something key. I've seen other channels say they don't particularly care about any of the cultural issues. They just want fun comics. I think this is the part of your tweet which resonated with the Diversity and Comics channel, because he wants comic books to be like the hot dog industry. No one cares about the politics of their hot dog vendor, and a good hot dog vendor doesn't insult people who want to buy his hot dogs. But here's the reason I think this is so important. You can't ignore this debate forever. What if the debate in the comics culture wars isn't like a debate between people who prefer two different types of hot dogs, brats versus stadium reds, or different types of condiments, mustard versus relish? What if it's more like a debate between a group of people who'd like some hot dogs and a group of people who believe the practice of making hot dogs is immoral, and that all hot dog vendors, ideally, should sell tofu burgers instead because they sincerely believe that is more moral? What if we're not talking about a few weirdos from PETA, but a movement that is actively working to shut down those hot dog stands and uses all sorts of means to shut them down? I think that is a better analogy of what the comics culture war is about. If being a vegetarian is like being your average leftist who advocates for social justice, then being a radical animal rights activist who wants to see all hot dog stands shut down forever, that's like being a social justice warrior. If you don't like that slang term for the group, I think a good way of describing them would be academic, radical leftists. It's not that they're liberals. It's not that they advocate for ideas on the left side of the political spectrum. It's that they believe there is something inherently problematic about comic books and fantasy stories, period. And these problematic elements need to change. Superhero stories are fascistic. Shonen Jump manga are catered to the male gaze and perpetuate misogyny and patriarchal gender norms. The comics industry is a product of late capitalism to preoccupy the masses. I know you've heard terms and arguments like this because it's not a few weirdos on the internet. This is a forceful group of people who have read Marx, maybe they've read Trotsky, and they've read thinkers from the Frankfurt School during their time as students. I'm not saying they're a bunch of commies. I'm saying they've learned about life by reading these thinkers and are at least sympathetic to these thinkers. Some are more focused on feminism as their key issue. Some are more focused on institutional racism, but they are making themselves heard. I think it's admirable if you don't want to chase people away from comics by talking about politics. I don't think every comics channel needs to talk about politics or should talk about politics. We should have places on YouTube where people can just talk about comics and try to have some fun. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what your stance on this or that economic issue is, or this or that foreign policy issue. Let's have some fun and chat comics. But you can't come together and enjoy comic books with a group of people who believe that there is something fundamentally immoral about the comic books you are reading, and think children, and maybe even adult readers, shouldn't be reading them. Now, I think it's only fair for me to admit that I'm mostly speaking from personal experience here. I could talk in more detail about my experiences at a progressive school, how I made friends who I disagreed with on politics and religion, but I also encountered a radical movement that was committed to changing the world, to not just talking about politics, but bringing their views on social justice into every space possible. In my short time on YouTube, I've shown a few examples of that kind of belief system on this channel. Over time, I want to make a serious effort to show exactly who I've been talking about and just how radical their views are. Not on comic books, but on things like all art, all storytelling, all history. If you disagree over something as fundamental as what truth is, or what beauty is, or if the very concept of beauty itself is something good we should strive for, or something evil which promotes sexism, there is no common ground on which you can come together and sing Kumbaya. If one side of a disagreement perceives itself as warriors and justify destructive tactics to win their war, they take the opportunity for many people, some of whom might actually agree with some of their beliefs, to have a civil and friendly debate over these things. When you say you want comics to be fun for new people, I feel you, Comicstorian. I'm with you. But as much as I've always wanted to just talk about comics and how geeky I am for them, I personally think I can't ignore this group and what they say they want to do. I've seen them talk about social justice in relation to something else I've loved, classical art, and how problematic it is, or how sexist that art is, or how the very idea of art and beauty needs to be fundamentally deconstructed and replaced with a more postmodern definition of art. And I know that, of course, these same people are interested in comic books and video games. I might very well ignore them, but that does not mean that they are going to ignore me or my hobbies. That's why I think this is not a simple left versus right debate. But I do think there is a right side and a wrong side to the comic culture wars. I think the right side is the side that includes multiple kinds of diversity, not just racial, ethnic, and national diversity, but diversity of religious beliefs, political parties, and philosophies. A group that includes people who are to my left on both economic and social issues, but who share my concern for a growing trend of mainstream comic books becoming less about good art and good stories, and more about promoting social justice activism for children. And I think the wrong side is the one that insults everyone as either a Nazi sympathizer or just a Nazi. Full stop. I know that I'm speaking very generally here. I'm not asking you to take what I've had to say as definitive proof. I'm not asking you to change the type of content you produce for your channel. In sum, all I want to say is, I feel for you in spirit, Comicstorian, but I still think you're incorrect. And that in the long run, this debate is going to be critical to the history of comics. I hope I can contribute to this ongoing discussion in a meaningful way. Thank you for your time listening, and I wish everyone who loves comics the best of luck in their endeavors.